Plain and simple, those who argue against the legalization of prostitution do it from a moral, holier-than-thou standpoint, hiding their true intentions with an argument for protection for the women involved in the oldest profession and their health, their safety, and their well-being. There are also those who argue that legalizing prostitution would only lead to the abuse of more women and would make it harder for prostitutes to get out of the industry, or that young women would be taught that their body's sole purpose is sexual exploitation by men. Some others would argue that it is beneficial to punish the men who are paying for sex rather than punish the women who are selling it, and as bluntly as an article published by the BBC, where various prostitution models are shown, you can't prosecute a man for something a woman wants to do. The actual reason people are uncomfortable with listening to sex workers talk about legalizing prostitution has nothing to do with concern for the health and safety of women. If that were the genuine concern, prostitution would be legal in the United States by now. The underlying reason people disagree with legalizing prostitution is that prostitution is viewed as immoral because it involves women directly selling their bodies for financial gain. However, telling women what they can and cannot do with their bodies does not come from a place of morality, but from a place of control. It's true that current efforts by various European countries to legalize prostitution have been far from perfect. In Germany, what started out as a seemingly woman-positive movement has turned into a 16.3 billion euro a year industry, and human trafficking is not uncommon, rather than providing a safe space for their sex workers to be able to demand a pension and health insurance, as well as safety. If countries with legislation in place spent more time listening to current sex workers, the result of decriminalizing prostitution would include bringing safety, security, and respect to a demographic that has traditionally been denied such things. In an article published by Spiegel International that tells the heartbreaking story of Alina, a young Romanian girl who moved to Germany under the current impression that she would have a better quality of life if she worked as a sex worker in Germany, it was shared that, quote, Alina and the other women were required to pay the pimps 800 euros a week. They shared a bed in a sleeping room with 3 other women. There was no other furniture. All she saw of Germany was the Esso gas station around the corner, where she was allowed to go buy cigarettes and snacks, but only in the company of a guard. The rest of the time, says Alina, she was kept locked up in the club. Prosecutors learned that the women in the club had to offer vaginal, oral, and anal sex and serve several men at the same time in so-called gangbang sessions. The men didn't always use condoms. I was not allowed to say no to anything, says Alina. During menstruation, she would insert sponges into her vagina so that the customers wouldn't notice, end quote. To be frank, people, especially women, sell their bodies for financial gain in legalized fashions on a daily basis. For example, pornography and exotic dancing are both legal. It's common for people to have sexual relationships with richer partners as to benefit from their wealth, whether it is through seeking wealthy life partners or through the less formal but more increasingly widespread phenomenon known as sugar dating. It's also common for people to remain in unhappy relationships because they do not want to lose financial stability or spend money on a divorce. The difference is that in all of these other situations, it's easy for people to pretend that the women involved are not actually selling their bodies. It's easy to pretend that the pornography actors are just people having consensual sex and that the viewing public just happens to be observing. It's easy to pretend that the exotic dancers are not actually selling their bodies because they're not directly engaging in the act of sex. It's easy to pretend that the people who enter into or remain in a sexual relationship with wealthy partners could be there for reasons other than financial gain or security. Prostitution does not allow the general public to have the benefit of these pretenses. Rather, the industry is honest about how sex and money are directly related. As for many individuals, this is for a very uncomfortable notion. It's even more uncomfortable for some people to believe that women should be allowed to have the control over their bodies that would permit them to engage in prostitution voluntarily. They cannot allow themselves to believe that women would choose such a profession. Yet, rather than recognize this reality, those who oppose prostitution and its legalization march forth with arguments about concern and safety for women. They fail to realize that criminalizing prostitution does not help the sex workers, but their arguments lead to legislation that harms women while operating under the morally driven guise of wanting to protect them. The desire to protect women for sexual abuse will always be valid. And if anything, is the desire that should be more widespread in the United States. What is insincere is opposing legalized sex work for reasons that purport to be women's safety, but that are actually coming from a place of discomfort over women openly engaging in sexual interactions for financial gain. If women having sex for money is illegal, then we should also be criminalizing pornography, exotic dancing, and sugar dating. If the general belief is that all of these socially accepted practices are okay and not about financial gain, prostitution shouldn't be any different, and forums where decisions about the safety and rights of women are being made can be carried out objectively and transparently. And an article published by the Washington Post about Rhode Island accidentally legalizing prostitution mentions, quote, the statewide incidence of gonorrhea among women declined by 39%, and the number of rapes reported to the police in the state declined by 31%. By bringing the industry out of the black market and imposing strict regulations, this has improved the safety of sex workers. Brothels are required to obtain and renew safety and hygiene licenses in order to operate, and street prostitution is legal and heavily regulated in places like the red light district. Not only does sex work become safer when it is regulated, but legalization also works to weed out the black market that exists for prostitution, and therefore making women safer overall. Also, sex workers are not branded as criminals, so they have better access to the legal system and are encouraged to report behaviors that are a danger to themselves and other women in the industry. Finally, legalizing sex work will provide many positive results, including tax revenue, reduction in sexually transmitted diseases, and reallocation of law enforcement resources. Instead of forcing sex workers to conduct their business in unregulated black markets where their lives are in danger, all for the mislabeled purpose of saving women, there should be actual actions taken in order to save women. Legalize prostitution, impose strict regulations, and conduct comprehensive support systems that allow sex workers to do their job safely.